Maseches Yevamos Daf Ayin Test contains one Mishnah which divides the daf into two sugyas. The first half of the daf is the Gemara's conclusion of the story of how David HaMelech came to Aser the Givonim, the Nesinim, to marry into Klal Yisrael, and some discussion of perhaps they were permitted at some point, or perhaps the Gzeira actually goes back earlier. Then we get to the Mishnah, which introduces the topic of a Siris, and how the halachos of Yibam apply to him. The Gemara will discuss the machlokes between two Tanaim and the Mishnah, and what the source of the machlokes are, and a kasha on one of the two opinions. So the Gemara is in the middle of discussing that there was a famine in Klal Yisrael, and David HaMelech asked the Urim V'Tumim what the reason is. One of the reasons that were given is because Shaul, his predecessor, had killed out a number of Givonim. So David had gone to the king of the Givonim to ask what he could do to atone for it so that the famine could end. And the Givonim said, I want to be given 7 descendants of Shaul's family that I will hang, I will kill them. So David tried to appease him. He tried many ways to get him to come off this decree, but he refused. And that is the reason that the Givonim were forbidden to marry into Klal Yisrael. David HaMelech said at the time there are 3 simanim of being a Yisrael: Rachmanim, merciful, Baishanim, bashful, and Gomle Chasadim, and doing chesed, doing kindness. These Givonim obviously are holding on to this grudge and demanding blood in exchange. They don't qualify for any of them, and therefore they are not roi to connect to Klal Yisrael, to be a part of Klal Yisrael. Where do you see these 3 simanim in Klal Yisrael? So the Gemara brings psukim. V'nasan l'cha rachamim v'richamecha v'hirbecha, that's to show that they are rachmanim. Ba'avor tiyah yirasei al pneichem, that's to show that they are baishanim. And the man asher yitav es bonav es beisoi achar v'sham u'derech Hashem lasis tzedakah u'mishpat, that shows that they are gomlei chasadim. So that's how we have the decree against the Givonim. They could not marry into Klal Yisrael, but what's the rest of the story? What did David HaMelech do? So the Gemara brings the psukim and explains them. He actually went ahead and he complied with the request, and he took 7 descendants of Shaul HaMelech. And we have the pasuk that says, "V'yikach HaMelech Shnei bnei Ritzpa bas Aya sheyolda l'Shaul," 2 sons of Ritzpa that she bore to Shaul. Those are Armoni and Mephibosheth, and there's Chameshes bnei Michal bas Shaul, and 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Shaul, sheyolda l'Adriel ben Barzilai HaMechulasei. That this is Michal's daughter, this is Shaul's daughter Michal, who was at some point married to David, but she had 5 sons with Adriel bar Barzilai HaMechulasei. He took these 7 men, and he gave them to Melech HaGivonim, and he hung them all. So the Gemara says, how did he choose these men? Why these men more than anyone else? So the Gemara says that he passed them before the Aron, and anyone that the Aron kind of held on to and froze, those are the ones that the Aron had showed were guilty of some other crime. They were deserving of the death penalty anyway, and that's why they were given over. Anyone that the Aron did not grab, so they were allowed to continue on to life. So Gemara asks, but there's a pasuk that says, "V'yachmal hamelach Mephibosheth ben Yonasan ben Shaul shaloi ha'aviroi," that he had mercy on Mephibosheth, who was, because he was the son of Yonasan, and David had promised to take care of Yonasan's children. Shaloi ha'aviroi is not from the pasuk. That's the Gemara saying he had mercy on Mephibosheth, but how do he have a right to do that? So the Gemara says he didn't save Mephibosheth even though the Aron grabbed him. He didn't pass Mephibosheth before the Aron, and that's why he saved Mephibosheth from having to go. So the Gemara says that that's favoritism. How's he allowed to show favoritism to one over the other of the descendants of Shaul? So the Gemara says no, it's not what actually happened. He did pass him, and the Aron did grab him, but he was mispalel, and the Aron let him go. So it was really the Aron that allowed him to go. It wasn't anything. So the Gemara says that's still favoritism, because why was he mispalel for him and not for anyone else? So the Gemara says no, so he was mispalel for him in advance. He was mispalel mitchila, the Aron shouldn't grab him in the first place. That's okay. You're allowed to be mispalel for whatever you want, and the Aron didn't happened. We don't know if that was favoritism or not. If that was, if what would have happened had he not been expelled for it. So Gemara asks, why were these 7 people put to death for the sin of Shaul? It says, Lo yumsu avos albanim. A child will not be put to death for the sins of the fathers. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yechia bar Abbas is named Rabbi Yechanan. It's better that this pasuk should be uprooted from the Torah and not to create a chil Hashem. Had people seen that you can get away with killing the Gerim for no reason, it would have been a tremendous chil Hashem. And therefore, this is a way of avoiding the chil Hashem, and it's worth the fact that it's an exception to that rule. Okay, the Gemara brings psukim further. It says, "Vatikach ritzav vasayas hasak vatiteyu lo alatzor mitchilas ketzir ad nitach mayim leim en hashemayim v'inasna oif hashem lenuach aleim yomim v'chayis hada laila." So the pasuk says that the corpses of these 7 men were left out until the rains. And the mother of some of them, Ritzbah, covered them to protect them from the birds and the animals. So Gemara says, why are they left out? Do they have a halacha tolan of laseh eitz? You're not supposed to leave anybody out. It's supposed to get kfur that day. So Gemara answers, Rabbi Yonasan said the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yetzadok, that again, this was to be mekadesh shem shemayim. And it's better to uproot this halacha in order to create the Kiddush Hashem that was created because of them. Was the Kiddush Hashem? Everybody who passed by said, who are these people here? And they were told, these are princes, kings of they're the sons of the king. So they asked, what did they do? So they injured Gerim, converts that were not accepted. Givonim were converts that were not accepted. So that was a tremendous Kiddush Hashem, because everyone said, look at this nation that it's worth joining. The princes don't have any special treatment. They do something unfair, they get a just punishment. And this is a defense for people that are not even Gerim, not even converts. They're unaccepted converts. So a regular Yisrael certainly would be treated fairly. So 150,000 Gerim came and joined the Klal Yisrael because of this. So Gemara says, where do you see that? So we see that from Shlomo HaMelech's construction of the Beis HaMikdash. It says, V'hi l'Shlomo 70,000 nosi sabel, 80,000 chotzif bahar. He had 70,000 people working hard, carrying things, and 80,000 stone cutters. And we know that the Yevonim took some of these jobs. So you see that there were 150,000 people who came to join Klal Yisrael. So the Gemara says, hold a second. Who says they were Yisrael? Maybe they're just Avadim. Who says there are people who came from far? Maybe they were regular Yisraelim. The Gemara says, no. It says, B'nei Yisrael and Nasan Shlomo Evet. Shlomo didn't take anybody to work from Yisrael. So the Gemara says, maybe they were hired workers. I didn't know that they were Gerim. They converted. Maybe they're just hired. So the Gemara says, okay, the proof is from a different pasuk which relates to this one, and says, Vayisbar Shlomo kol hanashim hagarim hagerim asher beretz Yisrael. And a bit later, Vayimtzu 150,000, and a bit later, Vayasmehem 70,000 sabel 80,000 chotzev bahar. So you see that he counted the Gerim in Eretz Yisrael, and those were the ones that he made into the 70,000 porters and the 80,000 stone cutters. So again, you see from there that the Gerim converted. There were 150,000 converts based on this incident. So in other words, the kasha that we're saying here, the point of this whole story is to show that the Nesinim or the Givonim were forbidden to marry into a Klal Yisrael from Xera from David HaMelech. The Gemara asks, but Moshe Rabbeinu already made a Xera against them, like it says, that he said that these water carriers and the wood choppers, which are the jobs that Yeshua gave to the Givonim, they were left out. So you see that he decreed against them. So it was already Moshe Rabbeinu had decreed. So the Gemara says Moshe's decree was only for his generation, decreeing for the future that was done by David HaMelech. So the Gemara asks, no, it was done by Yeshua. Because you have Yeshua says, so you see that he made them for long term. They were always considered to be left out. They were set aside that not to marry into, because they were made into chot ve'etzim and shoyeve mayim that are not allowed to marry into Klal Yisrael because of what Moshe Rabbeinu said. He extended it and applied it to these Givonim. Someone says, no, Yeshua only said that they are supposed to be Lemizbeach Hashem. As long as there's a Beis HaMikdash, that's when they are Chotvei Eitzim and Shovevei Mayim, because it's for the Mizbeach. And therefore his decree only applied as long as the Beis HaMikdash still stood. David HaMelech came and made the Gezerah even after the Beis HaMikdash will be down. Now, the Gemara says in the days of Rebbe they wanted to matir these Nesinim after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. And Rebbe said we could be matir our chelek, the part that's for after the Beis HaMikdash, made by David HaMelech, that we could be matir. But the part that belongs to the Mizbeach, the part that for when there is a Mizbeach, that's not our Rishus, that was Yeshua's decree, that's not for us to be matir. And Gemara says this disagrees with Reb Chia bar Abba, who says we could matir the part of the Mizbeach. As a matter of fact, we don't have to. The part of the Mizbeach is mutter automatically. Since there's no Mizbeach anymore, so there is no longer any Isser mitzad Mizbeach. Our part, that we could matir ourselves. The David HaMelech part, we can do. Okay, this concludes the Gemara. Now we get to the next Mishnah, who introduces the topic of the Sris. Sris is somebody who cannot give birth. And there are two types of Sris. Sris Adam and Sris Chama. Sris Adam is somebody who became unable to give birth, unable to have children at some point during his lifetime, but he was born healthy. Sris Chama means he was born with some injury or condition which makes it impossible for him to have children. So what is the halacha of a Sris? A Sris is not supposed to marry Bekal Hashem. Just like it's very similar to a Petzua, Daka, and a Kos Shavcha. Question is, does his wife fall to Yibum? And can he do Yibum? So more quotes machlokes between Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Yeshua says he doesn't know. So Rabbi Yeshua says he heard that there's two different halachos about a Sris. Some Srisim could do chalitza or yibum, and some srisim cannot. So let's see the actual wording of the Mishnah. So Gemara says, Rabbi Yeshua says, I heard that there's a sris that can do chalitza, and then his wife gets chalitza. That means to say, the mitzvah of yibum does apply to her, but you can't do actual yibum, you have to do chalitza. Now, there are other srisim that there's no chalitza. He can't do chalitza, and you don't have to do chalitza to his wife, meaning there's no mitzvah of yibum at all. So Yeshua says, ainly the farish, I don't know which one's which, I don't understand what are these two things. So the Gemara says there's a machlokes between, the Mishnah says that is, there's a machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer, which sris does chalitza and yibum, or chalitza at least. According to one opinion, he'll be able to do yibum as well, and which one cannot. So they are reversed. Pshatim. Rabbi Akiva says a sris adam who was born healthy and became a sris at some point, he could do chalitza, and his wife needs chalitza, and the reason is because he was healthy at some point in his life. A sris chama who was always a sris, he has no chalitza, his wife doesn't require chalitza, and he can't do chalitza. So according to him, a sris adam is better because he was at least kosher at some point in his life. Rabbi Eliezer says the opposite is true. A sris chama is the one who is kosher, who's the one who requires chalitza and can do chalitza, because he can be healed. There's a refuah for a sris chama. A sris adam will never be healed, and therefore there is no chalitza. He can't do chalitza, and his wife doesn't require chalitza. Now, the Gemara says it was a testimony that was brought, the Mishnah says it was a testimony that was brought by Rabbi Yeshua ben Beseira from an incident that showed like Rabbi Akiva, that is the son of Megusas, who was in Yerushalayim, who was a sris adam, and they did yibum to his wife, and supports Rabbi Akiva to show that he was a sris adam, and he still required yibum. Now, the Mishnah goes further, and it says a sris does not do chalitza, it does not do yibum. An islandess does not do chalitza, and does not do yibum. A sris who will go ahead and do chalitza doesn't passel her. It doesn't create the status of chalutza, which is aser to kahuna. If he does yibum, if he does bia, so that passes her to kahuna because that's an iser kares, that's an iser eshes ach, shaloi b'makayim mitzvah. An island is the same thing. If she gets chalitza from the brothers, it doesn't pass her to kahuna because it doesn't count for anything. It's total nonsense. And if somebody does yibum to her, that passes her because it's a bias znus. And this last line here, when we say sris, we're obviously referring to the sris which is aser, each according to his own pshat. Rabbi Akiva, that would be a sris chama, and according to Rabbi Eliezer, that would be a sris adam. We now begin the Gemara, and the Gemara is a kasha on Rabbi Akiva first. Rabbi Akiva holds that a sris adam is allowed to do chalitza. He's in the parsha, he applies to the whole sugya of yibum, and he's allowed to do chalitza, and he has to do chalitza. So the kasha is that Rabbi Akiva holds that a chayvei lav and a chayvei karis are the same. He holds that there's no tvisas kedushin, there's mamzerus, and they're the same halacha, and therefore he holds that chayvei lavin, no mitzvah of yibum applies at all. So even a sris adam, even though he's only a sris adam, he's usher to marry. He's usher lavei bekal, and it's a lav if he does. So there's still a lav. So there's no parsha of yibum. So how could Rabbi Akiva say that he has to do chalitza and that his chalitza counts? So the Gemara answers, Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that a giyores is allowed to marry a sris. The Isser is only Sris's Asar Lave Pekahal. Rabbi Akiva holds like Rabbi Yossi, who holds that a Gioris is not called Kahal. And therefore we're talking about where the Yevama, the woman falling to Yivam, is a Gioris, and therefore there's no Isser between her and the Sris, and that's why he could do Chalitza if he's a Sris Adam. So if he's not a Sris Adam, if he's a Sris Chama, the Gemara doesn't explain, but the reason he's not in the sugya is because he doesn't count as lahakim la'achiv shem. He's out of the parsha of Yibam because he can't be making la'achim shem, which is the entire point of Yibam. But a Sris Chama is within the parsha, and that's why he has a mitzvah of chalitza, and there's no iser of Sris to love it bekal because she's a ger. So Gemara's kasha says, why does he have to do chalitza? So he should be able to do yibum. So Gemara says he could do yibum. Rabbi Akiva holds that he could do yibum. So why does he say do chalitza? He's commenting on what Rabbi Yeshua said. Rabbi Yeshua said one could do chalitza and has to chalitza, one cannot. In Rabbi Eliezer, that's takat halacha. So Rabbi Akiva used the same expression. He could do chalitza, but Rabbi Akiva would even go further. The Gemara says, I'll prove it to you, because if you look at the story, the Gemara quotes where Rabbi Yeshua ben Pseir said Eidus on the Ven Megusis in Yerushalayim, he was a Sris Adam, and it says that they did Yibum to his wife. So you see that there is Yibum. Yibum applies over here. We're not only talking about Chalitza, according to Rabbi Akiva. Okay, so Gemara has a kasha though. The Gemara's kasha is that you have a brisa, which clearly is going like Rabbi Akiva, and it says that there's all these halachas, and it's clearly talking about where there is an iser of sris. So let's see the brisa. The brisa is a petzua daka, a kros shavcha, a sris, or a person who is very old and therefore unable to give birth. They could do yibum or chalitza, and they are in the parsha of yibum and chalitza for their wives. How does that work out? So if they die and they had wives and brothers, the wives fall to Yibam, and the brothers, they do Maimer, it counts as a Maimer. If they give a get, it counts as a get. And if they do Yibam, it counts as a Yibam. Or if they do Chalitza, it all counts, it works. Now, if they have brothers, and the brothers die without kids, and their wives fall to them, to Yibam, to these four, and here we're going to leave Zakin out. So here, again, if they do Maimer, it counts. They do Get, it counts. Chalitza, it counts. And if they do Yibum, there's a Kinyan. So you see, we're clearly going in Rabbi Akiva's opinion because we're holding that everything works over here. However, it goes ahead and we say, Asr l'kaimon. They cannot stay married. Because they're a Sris, or Petzudaka, Kros Shavcha, whatever it is, they cannot stay married to them because there's an Isser. So here, we're clearly showing that we're not talking about a Gioris and going in Rabbi Yossi's opinion. We're not saying that we're referring to a case where there's no Isser Lavai Bekal. There is an Isser Lavai Bekal. So then we're back to our original question. Why does Rabbi Akiva say that there's no, why does the Isser Lavai Bekal not a problem over here? So the Gemara therefore wants to give a new answer. The Gemara quotes Rabbah, who says we're talking about a case where they became a Petua Daka or Koshavcha or Sris, whatever it is, after the woman fell to Yibum. She fell to Yibum first, and therefore there is a Chalais Yibum, there is an obligation to do Chalitza. Then they became a Sris, and now they can't do Yibum anymore, but there still is a Zikas Yibum because they fell to Yibum, and therefore they have to do Chalitza. So Gemara asks, it shouldn't be true. The halacha shouldn't be correct. The halacha should be that if you have an asay against the los asay, or if you have a los asay against the asay of Yibum, it should knock it off, even if it came later. Even if the los asay came later. Where do you see that that's true? Versus, look at the halacha of a man his sister-in-law falls him to Yibum, his wife's sister, but his wife is a ketana. So his wife is not married to him midoraisa. His wife is only married to him in midrabanan. When she grows up, if she doesn't do maimer, then she'll stay married to him. Then she'll be a gedola, and his Yevama, who's falling to him, is now his wife's sister midrabanan. When she grows up, she'll be pater from Yibum. So what's the halacha there? So we've seen in some machlokes. But Rabbi Gamliel's opinion is that he can wait until she gets married, and once he can wait, that is, until his wife grows up, and once she becomes a gedola, she'll pater the yibum. So you see that even though the woman who's falling to yibum is not an achos ishta midaraisa at this point, because the sister is not married to deraisa, the ketana is not married in deraisa. When the ketana grows up, she becomes an achos ishta, she will have a p'tor deraisa. So even a p'tor that comes after the falling to yibum occurs, still paters. So in this case also, even if he becomes a p'tur daka after she falls to yibum, it should still be a p'tur. So the Gemara therefore goes to Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says this is a different opinion of Rabbi Akiva than the standard one. This is Tanan Debei Rabbi Akiva, who hold that there's a difference between the different types of chayvei lavin. The only chayvei lav that paters yibum, that knocks yibum off and counts as krisus, counts as kores, is the same, and there's no tfisas kedushin, all that. It's only a chayvei lav that's created by a relationship. A relative that's a chayvei lav because of the being a relative, that paters. Any other type of chayvei lav that applies to everybody, that's not kores, that's not mamzerus, that doesn't pater yibum. Sris is a chayvei lav that applies to everyone. It's not a relationship-based lav, and therefore there's no issue here. That's why it doesn't pater this yibum. Okay, that's all the Gemara has to say about Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara now has a kasha that we said lahakim la'achiv shem. So you have to, the point of yibum is to create lahakim la'achiv shem. So the question is that there is no lahakim la'achiv shem on a sris. So how does this count as lahakim la'achiv shem? That's Gemara's kasha. That's still a kasha on Rabbi Akiva. Where do you, if this sris, even a sris adam, can't give birth, where is lahakim la'achiv shem? So the Gemara says that only applies on somebody who never had shas hakosher, someone who was born in be'isr, and it has to be that way, because if you'll say that somebody who had shas hakosher is never is not in the mitzvah of yibum, then no woman will ever fall to yibum, because her husband at some point in his life before he died was unable to give birth. At some point, the sickness, the weakness of the impending demise created him to say that he can't have children anymore. So at some point when he was close to death, or he was weak enough that he couldn't have kids, so then he was a sris at that moment. So when he died, he was a sris. So if you say that sris is not in the parsha of lahakim la'achiv shem, so then no woman falls to yibum. Obviously the reason that's not a problem is because previous to that he was able to have kids. So you see that doesn't count as a sris. Sris is only, as far as this halachas of lahakim la'achiv shem, that's only something which is true if he was born unable to have kids. So the Gemara says that's good for Rabbi Akiva. But if you look at Rabbi Eliezer holds the opposite way. Rabbi Eliezer holds that the only one who is in Parsha of Yibum is somebody who never had Shas HaKosher. And somebody who had Shas HaKosher, somebody who was a Sris Adam, he is the one who is not in the Parsha of Yibum. So now you have a kasha. But every man before he dies is not able to have kids. He should count as a Sris when he dies. So one says, no, that's not a problem. That's not being a stress. The weakness of the death is part of the death. It's not considered to be a state that comes independent of the death, and therefore we don't view it as being a stress at the time that he died. It's just part of the dying.